Right, hello. Good evening and welcome to a meeting of the Scrutiny Committee of the Melton Borough Council. Members are reminded that we will be using the audio-visual system this evening, and the meeting will also be streamed live on YouTube. Members are asked to physically raise their hands in the usual way to indicate they wish to speak, and to use their microphones when speaking for the benefit of all present. The microphone is live when the red light displays. Please switch mobile phones to silent. Should you need to leave the room during the meeting, unless it's an emergency evacuation when emergency exits should be used, please use the marked exit and entrance signs. I will now provide a reminder of the evacuation procedure. In the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, please leave by one of the 6 emergency exits around the sides of the chamber. Please assemble at the far side of the front car park nearest to the park entrance. Officers will be on hand to assist anyone who requires assistance. There is legislation that allows the public to film, record, or use social media at a council meeting. This must not be disruptive to the good order of the meeting, nor include any filming or recording of the public seating area. Alongside myself, Robert Child, the chairman of the Scrutiny Committee, I confirm that the following members are present and participating in this meeting. Councillors Siggy Atherton, Steve Carter, Prue Chandler, Chris Evans, Simon Lumley, Pam Posnett, Tim Webster and Jacob Wilkinson. We also welcome Ronan Brown, portfolio holder for Housing and Landlord Services. In addition to this, we have the following council officers in attendance. To my right is the Director for Housing and Communities, the Deputy Chief Executive, Michelle Howard, the Strategic Lead for Supporting Communities, Rachel Chubb, and to my left, Senior Democratic Services and the Scrutiny Officer, Adam Green. Apologies for absence. Anyone heard from Elaine? Right. Yeah. No. So at the moment, there's no apologies, and we await Councillor Holmes. Minutes. I invite a proposer and seconder to confirm the minutes of the Scrutiny meeting on the 24th of January. Jacob.
Happy to propose.
Yeah, that's fine. Councillor Siggy Atherton, seconded. Thank you. Declarations of interest. I invite members who wish to do so to make declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Is there anybody? No. So we swiftly move on to item 4, review of the forward plan. I've got nothing to forward plan. It is what cabinet's looking at and or looked at over the last few months. Item 5, review of Scrutiny work programme. Very little to say on this one because as members have said over the last couple of meetings, we can't start putting items on for the new Scrutiny Committee. We don't know who will be on it, and we don't know those who are who'll be electing it or won't make it. So we quickly move on to homelessness. I would like to invite the Director for Housing and Communities, Michelle Howard, to introduce the report and to hand over to Rachel Chubb, who will take us through a short presentation on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So members, in front of you this evening, you've got the report which just covers some of the legislative context relating to housing options and homelessness, some quite significant changes in the last few years in the way in which homelessness is dealt with by local authorities. So a really good opportunity for Rachel to take you through what that means in practice and the demand and the cases that we deal with within Melton. As I hope you'll see from the presentation that will follow, we've got a really positive story to tell. We've got some fantastic partners in Melton who we work closely with, and that's really important for preventing homelessness. But we've also seen a much improved picture in terms of our performance and our ability to prevent homelessness and act earlier. And to reduce the number of people that we end up placing into B&B accommodation. Homelessness prevention and housing options is not without its challenges when you consider challenges around affordable housing supply. So it's an area that we have to keep under constant review. We've made a number of changes within the service area over the last few months, and I'm absolutely delighted that Rachel's joined the team to really support us with her knowledge and expertise as we move forward as well. So you've got the report, but we thought it would be helpful to put some of that into context really through a presentation. So with your support, I'll hand straight to Rachel, who will take us through that presentation, and then we can pick up any questions at the end. Thank you.
So what we wanted to do with the presentation was just give you a bit of a background on the legislation and why we do what we do, because it might help explain some of the decisions and some of the outcomes that we come to. So in 2018, the Homeless Reduction Act gave local authorities new powers to deal with homelessness. This put the focus on trying to prevent people from becoming homeless in the first instance, and that anyone will be owed a duty for advice and assistance. Prior to this, people were only, in a lot of local authorities, people were only owed a duty if you were believed to be in a priority need. The Homeless Reduction Act gave local authorities, meant that we had a duty to provide advice and assistance to everyone. The new legislation meant that councils had a duty to prevent homelessness, but also a duty to relieve homelessness. So what that means in practice, it means we will assist anybody who is at risk of homelessness, irrespective of a belief in priority need. It means we've also got set timelines of 56 days to work with someone under each duty to achieve a positive outcome. As it says, prevention, someone in accommodation who is at risk of homelessness. So for instance, somebody who's maybe been served a notice from the landlord. Relief, someone who either has no roof over their head, sofa surfing, or has a notice expired. What it doesn't mean is that we have a duty to accommodate everyone who approaches us homeless. So while we can give an advice and assistance to everybody, and we'll discuss later how we do that, it doesn't mean that we have to accommodate every single person who is coming to us who may be at threat of homelessness. So I've gone into the process. So what can happen is somebody can approach us either under a prevention or a relief duty. If they come under a prevention duty, I'll use the example, somebody who's been served a 2 month notice from the landlord. They come to us, we have 56 days to try and resolve their homelessness. If we can't, it then moves into a relief duty, which means we have another 56 days to try and stop them, stop them becoming homeless. What we want, ideally, what good practice should look like is you get more people coming in prevention, so you've got all that time to work with somebody. You get somebody coming in relief, that means you've only got that 56 days before you get to the main duty. If we've worked with somebody in a relief duty for 56 days and we can't stop them becoming homeless, we then have to make a decision. That's when we make the main duty decision as to whether or not we would be accepting a formal statutory duty to accommodate them and believe that they're in a priority need, not made themselves intentionally homeless, are eligible and have a local connection. If they're not in priority need or potentially have made themselves intentionally homeless, I've missed that a little bit off there, then that would be the end of our duty and no further assistance will be given. During the process, so during the 56 days, we put together a personal housing plan with the customer. This is a legal requirement and it details the actions the officer and customer will do together to either remain in the current accommodation or to move to alternative accommodation. My officers will discuss realistic options. So for instance, if we get a household who wants a 3-bed property and they say they only want to live on 2 particular streets within the borough, we can explain it's very unlikely that that will happen, but they could get a property in these other areas. And it's just trying to frame that picture of what is realistic and what is what's realistic and what is ambition, I think, really, is that for where they want to live. We also discuss barriers to accommodation. So this could be pre-existing rent arrears, bad credit, poor behaviour, or barriers to long-term accommodation, but we will discuss honestly, but try to find ways to overcome the barriers. So it's not about saying you've got these barriers, you're never going to be accommodated. It's what can we do to help you get accommodation with these barriers. You may not get the nice property that you would ideally want, but let's work towards that. And how can we work towards that? During the process as well, we look at support needs and identify any risk of issues in sustaining accommodation. What we don't want is to put somebody in accommodation and then 2 months later they've come back round because it's failed. We want to make sure we've got the right support network in place, or at least put referrals into the right support network to make sure that whatever accommodation they go into is sustainable. So our positive, this is just a slide on what our positive outcomes look like. So this can be financial incentives such as rent in advance or a deposit, payment of rent arrears if the property is affordable. So we'll pay rent arrears if, for instance, somebody might have lost a job, couldn't afford to pay the rent, but ongoing it's affordable. If, for instance, the rent's gone up, or it might be there's been a change in the circumstances, which means the rent is no longer affordable, we'd probably look for other accommodation or look for some interim options. We look at mediation between the landlord and tenant to resolve difficulties, mediation between neighbour. If there are neighbour disputes, we'd work with our community safety team around that. We'd also look at lock changes to make people feel safer in the current property for victims of domestic abuse and other sanctuary scheme measures, discretionary housing payments, and also we would access charitable funds to try and stretch our homeless prevention grant. So working with our partners, we are unable to achieve positive outcomes if we didn't work with partners. So some of it can be, one of them is referral to environmental health to try and resolve any conditions that make the customer feel that a current property is unreasonable to live in. The reason for this, if it's in the private sector, is if we didn't do a referral to environmental health, or at least inspected the property to assess the conditions, that person could move out, somebody else moves in, and we have the same problem again, and we're not resolving the issue. What we want to do is resolve the issue in the first instance so that particular household doesn't have to move. We look at referral to our partners to help with budgeting, maximising income, food bank assistance, or other safeguarding concerns, because for all the best will in the world, we, the Housing Options team, haven't got the capacity and the resource to manage all the needs that a particular person has. We would prefer to do referrals to people who are trained in those particular areas and then get a good picture of what we're looking at. We'll also refer to agencies supporting with domestic abuse, drug and alcohol, tenancy management, mental health, and we also look at promotion of Street Link to support people experiencing rough sleeping. Alternative accommodation options, application to the housing register, referral to supported accommodation within the Melton area, and we've also got referral to supported accommodation projects outside the Melton area, and also support to access private rented sector. So as I alluded to earlier, the key to being successful in preventing homelessness is identifying it early. What we need to do is get people before they hit that crisis point, and to ensure that we've got a plan in place so that we can look at, we might not be able to successfully accommodate everybody, but we can at least get a plan together and identify what issues there might be, and then see what we can do from there. So with this, we've created a duty rota. This is one homeless prevention officer who's on duty every day and deals with all initial inquiries that are coming through. These are physical approaches, phone calls, emails, bird carrier, anything that comes through. That duty officer is there to deal with anything that comes in on that day, and they will take that household as a case. We've also got the out of hours service. If somebody calls out of hours of an evening, the following morning, that duty officer will pick that up so that they can respond to it on that as soon as they're back in work. This will look at sourcing appropriate accommodation. So out of hours may have put them out of area in accommodation, and we'll look at if that's appropriate for them in that instance. And if we can, we'll try and get them back in the Melton area. And we've also been doing bulletins to letting agents. So when we get spike periods, such as Christmas, where we think people may be spending money on Christmas presents rather than rent, if money's tight, we'll do an alert to letting agents to say, if you've got people who are incurring rent arrears after the Christmas period, please come to us, because we'll get involved with the families and see what we can do, maybe help clear some rent arrears. We've also looked at formal protocols as part of a county homeless group with children's social care, leaving care and the justice services to identify people who are people who are 16, 17 who are homeless, people, young people in leaving care, and people who are in the East Midlands, Leicestershire area prisons, but we're also looking at East Midlands prisons to try and stop them becoming homeless on release from prison. Rough sleeping. Rough sleeping is, as you can probably imagine, isn't as simple as just providing bricks and mortar. It's about the support that goes with that. And this only can be ended with a joined up approach with other services to tackle the complex needs. To ensure people don't become rough sleepers, go back to it or stay out longer, we work closely with the Rough Sleeping Initiative county team. There's a couple of methods that we do for that. So we identify a target priority group. These are people with a history of rough sleeping within the borough. So in April 22 last year, we identified 5 people that had over the previous year had a history of rough sleeping. We're hopeful that on the 28th of March, our final person will be accommodated and a refresh cohort will be identified for the forthcoming year. We try to identify instances of rough sleeping early, so working with partners to promote StreetLink to identify rough sleeping as early as possible. StreetLink is pushed by the representative from Department of Levelling Up, so that's something that we are going with as a county, and it's trying to encourage referrals through that so that the street outreach team can get out to people who are rough sleeping as soon as possible. Also working with Department of Levelling Up, the representatives we have from that, to identify trends in figures, patterns of behaviour, to assess how we can work to the government target of ending rough sleeping by 2025. What we're currently working on is rough sleepers who are presenting. Are they new rough sleepers, or are they repeat rough sleepers that have been accommodated and then come back into rough sleeping? We've in Leicestershire, we're booked the trends because we've got new rough sleepers, but what we're looking at is, are they new rough sleepers to your area, but they're travelling around, we think they're travelling around the boroughs to get the different help, and then so they could be new to Melton, but Hinckley and Bosworth know them, Charnwood know them, and we've just not accessed the right support for them. So it's trying to get that joined up approach. So our target priority group outcomes, I've put this on there because I just thought it might be interesting for you to know and just to see just some of the options that we've achieved. Case 1 moved into supported accommodation and is doing really well. Case 2 has not slept rough during 22-23. We believe he's resumed relationships with family and partner and is able to live with them. We've heard that through hearsay, through partners and through other agencies. Case 3 had a history of sofa surfing and sporadic rough sleeping, quite active criminal activity, cuckooing, difficult to engage. He was a perpetrator of cuckooing. Now he's accommodated in supported accommodation. Criminal and antisocial behaviour activity has reduced. That's been checked with the police and with our tenancy services, and he's not been known really at all for the last few months. With that particular case, what we did is the way we could engage with him was through our severe weather emergency protocol, where we house anyone who's at risk of rough sleeping and when it's cold weather, so when it's freezing temperatures. We took a bit of a gamble with him and we extended his stay in accommodation because he was starting to engage with us, and we thought if we kick him out and he goes back on the streets, we've lost him. Touch wood, it seems to be okay, but yes, positive. Case 4 moved into Melton Borough Council accommodation, but we still believe there are periods where they will go and rough sleep in other areas, not in Melton or in Leicestershire, but we think they're going out to different areas. Case 5 has slept in a tent for over 3 years within the Melton Borough, and we hope he will be accommodated at the end of March in another housing provider property. Fingers crossed for that one. So our budget statistics. for 22-23, you can see the reduction in bed and breakfast spend. We've put a real focus on trying to get people out of bed and breakfast, so we can use the money that we spend on bed and breakfast to get people more secure accommodation using things like deposits and rent in advance. We paid nearly £6,000 for utilities for temporary accommodation. What we've done now is we've stopped that, because we've now put that onto the person who's in a temporary accommodation, because if they're in accommodation, we need to be teaching them how to gain their own independence. Rent in advance, nearly 14,000, rent arrears, 4,000, and we've also invested in staff training as well. For the forthcoming year, our focus again is to reduce B&B spend, increase the amount we spend on rent arrears to try and get that prevention focus on there really, and that means more engagement with private landlords, more engagement with housing providers. We've stopped the temporary accommodation utilities, and we've also created cost codes for sanctuary schemes for domestic abuse. That sounds like a very simple thing, but it means it gets rid of red tape when we're trying to do things like lock changes and put anti-vandal paint on drain pipes to stop people climbing up. That's some of the things we've done. We've had some of the issues within the council. It's been, I don't know what code this goes to, who does this, who does that. By creating a simple thing like that across housing options, tenancy services and voids and repairs means we've got just that mechanism in place. Also creating cost codes for SWEP so that we can identify what the spend is for the severe weather. Severe weather isn't just freezing temperatures, it's really hot temperatures as well. So we would provide accommodation. We provided accommodation this year when it was hitting mid to late 30s. Reported figures, as you can see, approaches to the service are pretty much there or thereabouts. They're not increasing, but we have been able to increase the number of cases that we've prevented or we've relieved homelessness for. So reported figures for temporary accommodation. Figures for 22-23 are slightly skewed because from during COVID, the government initiative Everyone In, we still had people who were part of the Everyone In scheme, I think better word, and so we've put a real push on trying to get them out. So that skewed our figures because they had really lengthy stays in temporary accommodation. As you can see, 385 days, 368 days. We've got one household at the minute is 420 days, but was waiting 168 days for the offer of a property. I think they were offered a property in August, but there's with the provider, but there's been issues and they needed a specific type of property. So there's been particular issues with that. Again, that's skewed figures. So this is just a breakdown of the types of approaches that we've got. Our two main areas are family and friends asked to leave and the private rented sector. I'd say I'd attribute a large proportion of family and friends asked to leave due to cost of living crisis, where maybe they just can't afford to keep people in the properties anymore and they need to get their own accommodation. We also have a lot where you've got young couples living with parents, they're having a baby and they need to get their own independent accommodation. Relationship breakdown, domestic abuse, and a social rented tenancy. And then, like I said, we've only got 7 that we've got uncoded, but you can see from there the types of approaches that we get. So it's quite varied. So our main reviews, complaints and compliments, our main source of challenge really is about the housing, is about the banding on the housing register and people not agreeing with the banding that they're in. Housing allocations policy was reviewed in last year, and that meant that some people dropped a band and it meant that they weren't as high as what they thought they were. What the allocations policy does is make it a very transparent process about who gets what accommodation and when, but it also puts the right people in the right priority, and it makes sure that it's not going on waiting time, it's going on urgency of need. So if somebody's on in a medium band and is on there for 5 years, they're probably less urgent to leave than they are somebody who is fleeing an abusive relationship who's come yesterday and may be able to get a property. They would go into high priority banding. Customer complaints. To date, we've had during the year, we've had 3 formal complaints to the service. Issues raised are delays, level of service received. This has been addressed. It's not often that we get compliments as well, but we have, you can see the compliment there. Just the team being supportive, and it's what the team do is appreciate that when people are coming to us, they are probably at their lowest ebb, and it's the support that we can give that maybe is a bit of a kickstart to them getting assistance to change other things within their life, not just accommodation. We appreciate we're not just accommodation, but we have to go with, we've got a limitation. So it is quite nice to get the odd compliment. Like I said, not that many, but nice to get one. And that's it.
Much, Rachel. We'll start the debate now then with Councillor Atherton.
Thank you very much. I'm sitting here and while you were going through it, I'm thinking, well, I know this one and I know that one and I know that one. And I have to say, all the feedback I've had back from every single one has been extremely positive, thankful and really happy with what you've done. In some cases, I think you went above and beyond what is expected, and it's been really appreciated. I mean, I see them from where I work all the time, and somebody who's been homeless a long time, they were walking around like this. Once you gave them accommodation, they were all of a sudden, it's like the world got lifted from their shoulders. So the work you do is really, really appreciated. And I have to say thank you very much.
Just a quick one. How many have we got homeless at the minute then? The figures, please, if you got, Rachel.
We've got 20 people in temporary accommodation, and we've got a caseload of 82. So the 82 aren't all homeless, so they would have, they're maybe at threat of homelessness, but we've got 20 people who are homeless in temporary accommodation. 6 of those are in bed and breakfast. 6 of those are in bed and breakfast. The others are dispersed between our own accommodation and other supported accommodation that we hope to move on.
Appreciate that, Rachel. But then we've got to start looking at getting these properties moving quicker. What's empty, what's been on the open market for 2 to 3 years, what's been standing empty, to get them filled, get these people homeless, get them into properties. Some of these properties are standing empty for 2 to 3 years.
You're happy to take either of you? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Over to Councillor Brown. Thank you.
Yeah. Just to come back on that, Councillor Carers, one of our top priorities has been sorting our own voids out. You have to remember we're not the only provider of social housing or accommodation in the borough. We have got housing associations who are up on about 100 units now of accommodation that they can go into. So it's also working with them to make sure they turn their properties over. We've greatly improved our own stock. The other area that we need to look at is supported housing, because putting somebody who just presents with issues, put them into general needs is not always the answer, and often that fails. And the next stage of the challenge that we as administration would like to do if we get re-elected is to look at what our supported housing strategy is, working with the county council and working with other housing association providers. Because if you've got an alcohol or a drug addiction, going into a general needs property with no support, you're highly likely, 80–90% likely to fail. But if you go into a supported housing model with some hours of support, maybe 10 hours, 20 hours, 50 hours of support, which there is some of that accommodation in the borough, you're more likely to succeed, you're more likely to come out the other end. Or if you've got mental health issues, etc. And that's where it's going to be really important, where we link in more greatly above and beyond what we already do with the LPT around the mental health trust. So that'll be our next stage. So we've done some really cracking work so far. Yep. We recognise the challenges and we're going to move it on. But it's not always easy dealing with people, because what comes with people comes lots of issues. But we have a strategy and an approach that we hope to implement. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. The trouble is with this area, it's always a tricky one. It's difficult dealing with these kind of people. I've seen it. I see it every week, usually. This council, in my opinion, is doing an exceptional job at the moment, and it's getting better every week. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that housing is a jewel in the crown at the moment of this. Council housing, homelessness. The fact that homeless people are being basically scooped off the street now and put into accommodation. I mean, the one thing that makes me tearful is what happened to one person outside, Michael, of course, was not a success story, but you try your best. And I know that Michelle and the rest of their staff tried so hard for that person. But there's only so much you can do. I would urge all members to spend some time, even if it's only half an hour, going down to the food bank and seeing what's going on. Because I've done it and I will continue to do it. And it gives you an idea of what's really going on in this borough. In 2 hours, you learn a hell of a lot. And you see how bad it is for some people with the strain that they're going under, whether it's because of the fuel bills or the accommodation or abuse, that these people are daily coming in. And Ziggy, who's an angel, I keep calling her an angel all the time, has to do, and and Caroline have to deal with it there. I will still, and Michelle, this is where Michelle will get, I still feel, and it's still my view, that the one point of contact that we still haven't quite got right is using the resources of Ziggy and Caroline to know, well, basically find out what's going on the streets every week, because it is going on in the streets every week, and every week it changes, especially when the weather changes and all the rest of it. These people, the one thing I would also say, these people are not easy to deal with. They will say all kinds of things, as Ziggy knows, and they will do all kinds of things to get whatever they need, money or whatever. And there's, they've got drugs, alcohol problems and all kinds of things. But we must treat them as well as we can, because I think as a person, you're not judged by how you treat the best in the world. You're treated by how you treat the worst. That's my motto throughout. No matter how bad a person is, try to keep to a situation where you're trying to help them the best you can. The one thing that did worry me a bit is that I know we had a banding review. I remember seeing it, I think it came through Scrutiny, I can't remember, getting old. But we were told once that review was gone through, we'd see how bad or well it was received by the actual people who are affected by it. I wondered if that's coming back to us, because obviously a banding review can have a big impact on someone if they go from medium to low or whatever. And I don't think we've had a report back saying how many people are shifted, how many complaints we got in or anything like that, because that can kind of really upset people. I'm sure it can. I just feel, Chair, we need to have
We'll
feedback.
respond to that, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really fair question. So that new allocations policy is not so new in the sense it's been in place for a year now, and we've got that new IT system in place. That means that we allocate properties in line with it. That the complaints data tell part of that story. Very few complaints in this service area. What we also did was for anybody that was impacted negatively by any banding changes or by no longer being eligible for the register, was given the opportunity for a review. And we do have the ability to use discretion in exceptional cases, and I know the team will have done that. So, I'm confident that we've not impacted people and left them with no option. That was absolutely never our intention. But what we can do is just bring some information back to the committee at a later date, just to confirm what movement there was and what impact there was there. But I know the team have worked really hard to make sure we've worked through those housing options. And Rachel's right, the transparency of that policy and with it being embedded into that system means that we can really monitor every single case and make sure there are realistic housing options for everybody. I know that there are also more people on the register than we had previously. It's not become a barrier, but it's not the only solution. And that's the difficult reality check we have to give sometimes. We have to look at different options for people, but more than happy to bring some data back, and I'll work with Rachel on that.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Kat.
You just sort of get this off my mind, as it were. You use the words short term and long term. So in other words, these homeless people, we can provide short-term accommodation. And then obviously long-term is another issue. Does this mean there's some kind of waterfall where after, I don't know, 56, 2 months, 3 months or whatever, how long do we carry on putting someone in a hotel, bed and breakfast or whatever, where and how do we deal with when they've been there for 3 months, like one of these cases here, and you can't seem to move them on into long term? How do we deal with that?
So the people we have in, there's a couple of issues with that. The people we have in our temporary accommodation, so under bed and breakfast, in supported hostel, in our own accommodation, we have a duty to accommodate them until permanent accommodation comes available. So be it our own accommodation or be it in private rented. We also can't move people into accommodation that is unaffordable. So private sector is sometimes out of the question because it's just not affordable. Across through the districts, they're struggling to discharge their duties because there is no affordable accommodation for them in the private sector. So it's about what are the levels of affordability. What we also are trying to do is work better with our supported accommodation providers to try and get some throughput from that accommodation, because as Councillor Brown said, we don't have accommodation that meets particular needs that can maybe help do those tenancy ready, iron out some of the issues for short term and then move them on. But at the minute, those we've got a statutory duty to accommodate, they will be accommodated, but the focus is to get them out of B&B, and the ones that we don't, and sometimes that means making harsh decisions. I think previously we've accommodated a lot of people that maybe we were erring on, they weren't maybe a priority need, but we do have to make those harsh decisions, and we don't want to make that. But when we've got limited accommodation, if we believe, it's not if you are, it's if we believe you are in a priority need, you will be accommodated until we find accommodation in whatever sector.
Councillor Posner.
Not a major point, but I just wondered why you'd not included armed forces. I mean, you covered it, I suppose, in people who are vulnerable, but I would have thought because we've signed the covenant that we would have had armed forces somewhere in it.
I've put the number of armed forces people we've had approached as homeless. We have had one approach this year. And also anybody who approaches as an ex-veteran is an automatic priority need, so they would be accommodated.
Yeah,
Carter.
I'd like to back you up on that, Rachel. Thank you very much. That was in my ward. Thank you very much.
Got it, you're there.
Based put in our village, and they had nothing in common with us at all. We fortunately, we were the ward councillors and the parish council weren't made aware of this, and we had absolute chaos one weekend because they were advertising on Facebook, etc., etc. They hadn't got kettles, they hadn't got this, they hadn't got that, they hadn't got the other. And we managed to get them accommodated at the Grantham Food Bank the following day, but they hadn't got any money to get to Melton or even Leicester. And it seemed to me that there was a total breakdown of the services. You've got to realise that in our village, everybody relies on Grantham. I mean, hospital services, everything comes from Grantham, medical services. Nothing comes from Melton. Well, why put people from Leicester into Bottisford? It seemed absolutely mad to me. I mean, it's calmed down now, but there was great friction. It caused friction with a lot of people. I mean, I'm not blaming you because it wasn't a Melton problem.
We've got that I'm pretty confident. I'd be 99% confident that that wouldn't happen if somebody approached us. The people we get moving into properties, we are looking at furniture for them. We're paying for furniture from budgets. We're using the partners, Leicestershire Furniture Reuse Network. We're using Melton Furniture Project. We're buying kettles. We're doing everything like that to make sure people have got the basics for a property. What we're also doing is we are giving people those realistic options. If they want a 3-bed house and they ideally want Melton, we're saying to them, there is no 3-bed house in Melton Mowbray, but if you've got a car, we'll do affordability checks to look at petrol, how much it is for the village. We're doing those checks with them, but while we're not forcing people to take things that are going to put them in worse circumstances. And we're also taking account of schooling, education, health services, things like that. But while we're not in the luxury of here's some keys, you can have a property, we have to go with what we've got. But I'm very, very confident that that instance wouldn't happen now.
I'm a great supporter, as Ronan knows, of affordable housing. And I think that where it's all broken down is when we first had it at planning, that the area where you were granting the affordable housing was going to have the first pick, and then it was the radius ring was gradually going to be increased. But now that doesn't seem to happen, because on the wickets at Bottisford, a Derby association have got that, and when affordable becomes vacant, we get somebody from Derby in it. It seems absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I was on the planning committee when the wickets was passed here, and we granted it was to Bottisford first, but then apparently a Derby housing association took it over, and we ended up with Derby having the pick. No, well, it does happen, and it's happened again with this one on Normanton Lane, where this Leicester Association has got it.
Every section 106 says it has to be local.
Well, it's not happening.
Sorry.
Yeah, we'll let Councillor Brown just to respond here, please.
Yeah, funny enough, Councillor Chandler probably aware that a couple of weeks ago I convened a meeting of the officers and of the other relevant leads and portfolio holder Binlos on growth and regeneration, and Councillor Posnett attended that meeting as well as Chair of Planning. And basically going forward, we've given a quite a clear mandate to the officers that basically we want to maximise the amount of social housing that we have on the sites, that it must be for local people, it must meet local need. And we're sick and tired of developers saying, you know, through viability, that we can't deliver what we need for the local people. The two areas of that I'm quite keen, same as yourself, quite keen on, is one is social rent and the other is shared ownership, to get people on the ladder to do that. And we can, by doing that, we can start hitting the home ownership targets the government set down for us. But the other positive thing which Michael Gove announced on the 2nd of March was that we were exempt from the social rent and Pacific grants rates for affordable housing. And the government's now relinquished that, because they realised that basically a lot of it is good social housing, low rents, give people the ability to get in, get a job, build up some savings, maybe move on to owning their own home, or being able to adequately fund and pay for the house they're in, or maybe get into shared ownership. So we're moving that forward, and we've set a target. Basically, we want to see 200 more social rented properties built, plus on top of that some shared ownership over the next 4 years. That's the only way we're going to deal with you do, and there has to be local need, because you and I know in our villages there's local people need, like, you'll need a bit more rented than my village will do, but we will need an adequate amount that needs to be there to meet all of our needs. And the final thing I say is Melton Mowbray, we're going to have to make some brave decisions, guys, for those who do get re-elected, because we've given up a lot of our social rented housing and a lot of our affordable housing for the bypass. And that's great. That's what the people of Melton wanted. But the consequence of that is we've had less supply of affordable housing coming through. So we're going to have to look at exception sites. We're going to have to look at brownfield sites. We're going to have to look at council sites, and we're going to have to be brave and build it. And we're going to have to borrow money to do that there as well, especially in the housing revenue account, and bring our housing association partners in and probably look at, can we get the county council to work with them around supported housing, gifting land, or do we gift land, etc. There's going to have to be quite, or if a private developer's building, for them to build that extra bit of windfall in the town. Basically, we want this field here, and we're going to put social housing on it, a bit like what you see in Lake Terrace. But that's going to have to happen in the whole of Melton Mowbray, really, and the larger villages, really, if we're going to address our needs.
Chairman, Thanks for that, Ronan. I mean, you know, Pam and Tim came out last week and we met with a developer and they were only want to build 17%, and that's totally unacceptable. So we've got to move on from there. But my other question is, and it was highlighted last night on television by an instance on the Thoresby estate, where properties now, a lot of landlords are saying they're not fit to be brought up to the new acceptable standards. How are we going to cope with these people? Because we've got an awful lot of estates around here, only small estates. I'm not talking about the Beaver estate or Buckminster. I'm talking about some of the smaller estates. They're never going to bring these houses up to standard. They can see more in knocking them down and starting again and letting them out at £1,200 a month. I mean, in my village, most of the houses now are £1,200 a month, you know, 2-bedroom cottages. I mean, they're becoming unaffordable to people. And I don't know how we're going to get around this one, because it was a very interesting debate last night on Thoreby's. Yeah. But it's a, you know, a problem that's going to increase, because we all know that a lot of the old properties, it's a job to bring them up to standard. They're solid walls, so you can't insulate them.
Or respond.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to raise that, Councillor Chandler. And I think there is a real risk there, and that further reduces that supply of accommodation for the future. And that's a risk that we have to be alive to and alert to. You know, the requirements on private sector landlords are ever increasing. We're hearing talk of the potential for a new private sector housing regulator or ombudsman type approach being brought forward in the near future. Obviously, properties that cannot be insulated are more at risk to things like damp and mold as well. So there are some real risks there. And part of the work that Rachel and the team will do is just look for trends as well. So as we start to see, is there an increase in people coming through because they can't afford to stay, or because landlords can't bring those properties up to scratch? One of the things that we are doing, and we'll have to work really hard to engage landlords in this, is to start a programme of landlord forums. It's not something that we've been doing. The first one of those is to take place over the next few weeks. And as well as talking to landlords about preventing homelessness, financial support, cost of living, we will talk to them about any opportunities and options there might be around, you know, insulation and energy efficiency. So there may be some things we can do, but we don't have the magic solutions for some of these things. But what we're hoping is we can start to really build a dialogue with our private sector landlords as well. But the age of properties is a real challenge, and the inability to bring them up to those required standards is a real risk that was something we're going to have to contend with. And I don't think we have the answers yet either. Councillor Brown, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, absolutely right. And the other thing is that I think in some of the properties that you've been talking about, Prue, of doing some of this stuff in my own work, and the experts have come in and said you'll only get it to a level C. That's the banding on the energy efficiency. So you're absolutely right. How the government's going to overcome this is a challenge that the sector's thrown back to them to say, you know, a little bit about a little bit of reality and a little bit of common sense around, you know, it's going to take a longer, you know, we're not going to get there by 2030, are we? You know, we'll probably not get there by 2050. We'll probably not get there by 2070. So I think there's lots of conversations that we need to have, and we'll just be a small player in that, but one part of the voice of the whole sector to go to government and basically say, and completely agree with you around the cost of accommodation. It's how people afford to live in some of our villages is beyond me, really, at the price of the rents.
Got one or two trusts that have got probably 8 or 10 properties, and I can see those all going by the wayside. I mean, they're probably more reasonably rented. Rents at the moment, 500 or 600 quid a month, but that's still a lot of money out of the average wage. Especially when people have got to travel to work. I mean, we're not providing the accommodation in the villages. This is why we've got to get through to developers. We've got to have the full 30%. Sorry about that.
Just one. No, just hang on. Councillor Lumley and then Councillor Carter, and that's no. You take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just on the point, just to say firstly, thank you ever so much, everybody, Michelle, Alison, and cabinet member, and Rachel, for all your hard work on this. It is really good. I know there's been a huge improvement, and I've as a councillor and Councillor Cotter, we worked together on quite a few different issues, it is pretty good. What we've seen, really, you know, a lot of officers are actually working very hard. Just on the point that you just raised, Michelle, and other councillors, is that I've had some issues in the last few years with private rented accommodation, which hasn't been up to standard. And I think this council's actually been very good. The officers in environmental health have actually gone to the landlord and they have had a lot of good results from that personally. I've seen a big improvement from landlords. I think they've actually had sort of things come in the post to say they've got to improve, and they have done so. Just so you know, I know you're going to on about having a forum for landlords, but I will say up until now, I think it's worked very well. Just some other points I just want to pick up on. Just from me as a councillor point of view, is that when someone does approach the council and calls them up to obviously to say that they're homeless, the obviously they ring the council on the obviously the main 502 number. What happens is then they get told that they'll have a call back from an officer. That often doesn't happen because I get so many complaints about it, and then suddenly they go to a counsellor who could be me, could be anybody, and they say, I'm sorry, but I've not heard back. Can you try and get someone, Simon, to ring back? And so I email so-and-so, actually the people that I need to, and then they will eventually ring them back. But I find often it's always having to go through a counsellor to get them any action. Just number two as well, it was actually in the presentation, and you know, if someone rings up and they are homeless, but they're actually in a property at the minute, they're with other family and friends, etc., but they need a property themselves, they often want to be added to the actual housing waiting list. But when they ring 502, they are sort of told that they have to ring like another numbers often. Now, I've heard one in the last 3 weeks that they have to call now, and I think it ends in sort of like 342, and I think that goes to the one by Sainsbury's office, Phoenix House, yeah, where it was. It goes to Phoenix House. Now, I believe now there's about 3 or 4 different numbers that you have to go to. If you want to if you have yourself added onto the housing list, you have to actually ring this team. There's also another number for another team. And I think people get a bit confused. So then they often ring me and say, Simon, I'm confused. Can you help me out? Would you get anyone to ring us? Ring me, and I will. So I do. And so that's another point. It just would be good to have on the internet site a point of contact, numbers and that. Just another one as well, and I think also, like Councillor Carter and I've raised this over the years, is that after a property becomes empty, it's completely all like stripped out of curtains, blinds, everything. So when that homeless person then moves in, they haven't got anything, so they have to pay for themselves. And Councillor Carter and I, over the years, we've been keep saying to every officer there is, can you just leave everything in, because it would help the person moving in. But still they keep, and I've been told it's going to happen, but that's 3 years ago, and it still doesn't happen. It still gets stripped out, and suddenly they're moving in, they haven't got anything. And I think it'll help with the like council's budget to have them still in place. Just another one as well, just regarding the out-of-hours service. What I've had feedback from different people over the years is that if suddenly, and I know this is difficult, I know we've been discussing this evening, it's a very difficult, I know officers are in a very difficult position often to help, but if it's out of hours and suddenly on a actual Friday night at 8 o'clock PM, there's been some sort of massive family row, and you get a person that's been by their pets say, right, you're out in the street, and they literally do mean out, and they literally are homeless. I've told them to ring like the out-of-hours service, but the out-of-hours person they've sort of said, look, I don't think we can really do anything until until Monday morning. So, I know you get it wrong. I know it's difficult because you can't, I know an out-of-hours officer has other things to do. It's only one person, they're probably doing highways issues, probably to an extent, and a few other things, but I noticed, it's quite an issue. Then I'm sort of trying to help them to go like in a hotel, something, or through the weekends, and that's just another issue. Just one final point on page 7 of the presentation, the table, it says reported figures. Just to confirm, that year 2021, 2022, are we saying that we only sort of managed to help about 21% of people that came homeless at the council? yeah, and that's all it was. Thank you very much.
Okay, so if I answer from the last question back a bit, and then I'm going to hand to Rachel if that's okay. So just a point on that table. So this was really making the point about improved homelessness prevention. So it doesn't mean that's the only people that were supported, but only 21% of people had their case resolved with an outcome that meant that they didn't lose their homes, which is not ideal. So what that meant was we had fewer people being prevented and able to stay in their own homes, and much more households going into temporary accommodation, which is not ideal for those households, and it's certainly more costly for the council. So one of the first things Rachel was tasked with was shifting that balance back so that we were preventing more, relieving homelessness where we couldn't, and reducing the number of people needing to go into B&B, and that's why. So we can see a huge increase in that prevention activity, and that is where I expect it to stay, because that's really what we should be seeing. So hopefully that helps with that. Just on your point about out of hours, and I'll pick this up because I'm on out of hours call. We have a duty rota between us as a senior leadership team. What will always happen when somebody presents as homeless out of hours is we will see if there is any way in which it's safe and appropriate for them to stay in their accommodation. So that could be where that accommodation has arisen, where that conversation has arisen. But our colleagues in Harbour are empowered to arrange temporary accommodation as well, which they do. And where they're unable to do so, they will escalate cases to us as a team. And I know I've taken those cases myself. What that doesn't mean is we always have access to suitable accommodation in the moment, and it can be incredibly complex. And I know that, we've had many colleagues trying to arrange taxis in the middle of the night and things. So I guess it would be difficult for me to sort of make a judgment based on any one example. But if there is a particular case, then we'd be happy to pick it up outside of the meeting if that's okay. And Rachel, if I may hand to you for the other questions.
So just to answer your questions, in terms of responses, calls at the minute do go through to customer services, but they dial through to the duty officer. I don't know, I think the 342 might be the duty officer number, but that's not an external number. That's only for internal use to be signposted through to that.
Rachel, that number in 342, that's been advertised apparently to different tenants to say that you have to ring that number down.
I'd need to see where, because all queries regarding the housing register come through to housing options. One of the changes we made was we split the housing register function and the homeless prevention function, so that we've now got an officer solely dealing with housing register, and we have 3 officers dealing with homeless prevention. The idea of that was to make the 2 very different, so that it wasn't, just to make it more transparent and more clear. So that will go through to an officer within the council, but all calls should come through that 502 and they'll be put through. If there's queries about the housing register, that's very different to queries about somebody who's who's going to be homeless that night. I can chase that up. In terms of points of contact, we're based within Parkside. There should be nobody being diverted through to Phoenix House for anything to do with homelessness or housing register. If you've got cases of that, please send that to me and I'll deal with that. For the fixtures and fittings in accommodation, some of the fixtures and fittings have to be taken down for health and safety standards. If there's things like blinds on windows or curtains that can stay up, and it's not I can't think of it. It's not going to be a hazard. That's the word. Thank you. Then they'll stay up. We are keen to do that. And what our voids and repairs doing now is they are providing basic flooring for properties if the flooring isn't suitable or is uneven for properties. Temporary accommodation will have that in as well. In one property, for an example, we have got people who've put their own curtains and put their own blinds up, and they've taken them with them in the temporary accommodation. We've maybe bought them for temporary accommodation, they've taken them with them.
Quick one. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I could just quick one, Rachel. When someone gets accommodation, right, for 12 months, right, and it's temporary, they go on to temporary accommodation for 12 months, don't they? Right. Then when someone gets allocated a property, they go on a 12-month temporary tenancy, right? I'm getting a lot of issues and a lot of people, what's getting these properties, it doesn't matter if it's a 1-bed, 2-bed, whatever, they're causing a load of trouble in the property because they've got it, right? What action, to me, as a council, we're not taking appropriate action on them. We're signing them over to give them a full-time tenancy. I thought the 12 months were brought in to see what their behaviour was in that property, to make sure they're behaving properly. And there's a lot of people in my ward who's got properties and not behaving, and they still get it full-time. Thank you.
Yeah, Michelle will respond to that, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you. So obviously that's a tenancy management issue rather than a housing options and homelessness issue, albeit people may have come through that homelessness route, but there are a couple of things there. The first is that we have made a recent change to who does allocating of properties so that we can try and make sure there's more ownership from our housing officers in making appropriate allocations. The reason that people have introductory tenancies in that first 12 months is to check that they're tenancy ready and able to manage that. And it is important that we're managing any issues early where possible. Also, we have to accept that people need accommodation, and sometimes we have to work with people to work through their challenges and issues. So I guess it would be difficult to go into any specifics in this meeting, Councillor Carter, but happy to pick those up with you. But there are a number of complexities, but that really sits with Alison and the team rather than with Rachel and the team.
Right, thank you very much. That's the final question. So thank you, Rachel and Ronan, for attending tonight. Very comprehensive and detailed. And the recommendation is that Scrutiny note the report, and I will provide comments for consideration by Cabinet. Thank you very much.